Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Peter, for that generous introduction, and to all of our friends at the Asian Society. It is a great honour for me to be here to share with you a few words and to encourage you to ask questions. I miss the cut and thrust of politics, probably a little bit, but would welcome your questions. The reason why we showed that video is because it illustrates that the job of working together never stops. Never stops. And we have a rich history of a partnership between Australia and the United States that extends back to the time of, in fact, probably Teddy Roosevelt was the first American president to change the direction of the engagement in Asia when he sent the Great White Fleet at the request of Alfred Deakin to Australia to symbolise America's engagement with the Asian region. It was back in the early 1900s. But the telling moment of our partnership together started on the battlefields of France in 1918. America had been scarred by the first and hopefully, I'm sure, the last great war fought on this soil after the Revolution, that's the Civil War. So it was a reluctant participant in world affairs. And in 1914, as a British colony, in part Australia mobilised 10% of its population to fight for Mother England on the other side of the world. That'd be like sending an American army of 36 million overseas today. We sent 10% of our population to fight on the other side of the world. New Zealand, with 1 million people, sent 11% of its population and in one night lost 3,000 men. So we were totally battered by 1918. And America's role was crucial. Decided to join the war, mobilised 4 million men, only sent 1 million over because the war had finished. But they were untrained. And the commander of our army, General Monash, was asked by the British to take the town of Hamel to try and turn the Great Battle of the Somme. He said, "I haven't got enough soldiers. I've run out. They're buried in the soil here in Western France." So they said, "Well, why don't we try the Americans? We'll give you 10 companies of American doughboys. They're pretty untrained, so you need to train together, and let's see how it goes." So the Aussies and the Americans trained together for weeks, and they became buddies and they became mates. They had shared values. One thing that held everyone together was we all hated the British. Sorry about that, Dominic. At least we didn't go to war with the British, unlike the Americans. But it held us all together, and they became so fond of each other. And Monash reported back that he was ready to take the town of Hamel. And then General Pershing, the American general, said, "Hang on, we don't fight under foreign generals." And he ordered his American troops to pull out of the ranks. The Americans said, "No way." And they started peeling off their uniforms and putting on Australian uniforms because they were never going to abandon their buddies. So Pershing gave in. He said, "Righto, you can have 3 companies. They have to be embedded with the Australians." And out of respect for the Americans, Monash delayed the attack until the 4th of July. He took the town of Hamel in 93 minutes. And out of respect for the Americans, it was the first time the American flag was hoisted in a town that was captured. So we are the only country on earth that has fought side by side with the United States in every major conflict for 100 years. No other country has done it, including in our region, in Vietnam, in Korea. Until recently, we were the second biggest foreign military force in Iraq. Believe that? That's a long way from Australia. Last year we dropped 2,000 bombs in Syria and Iraq. We're doing it to help our mates. That's what we do. That's what mateship means. And you do it because you share values. You share beliefs. You share aspirations. I mean, when Teddy Roosevelt sent the fleet to Australia in the early 1900s, it wasn't long after that that he, in many ways, summarised everything the relationship is about having the courage in the field, not to have your soul darkened by the criticism. And he said you need to have a go, which is very much part of the shared spirit between Australia and the United States, having a go. He said it's far better to dream mighty things, to seek glorious triumphs, even though chequered by failure, than to be amongst those poor souls who neither suffer much nor enjoy much, because they live in the great twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat. Teddy Roosevelt. And that's very much what is at the core of mateship. Having a go, sharing values, fighting for freedom, fighting for opportunity, for family, for community, fighting for enterprise, fighting for the right to believe in the God you choose to believe in or not believe in. That's what we fight and die for, and that's what mateship is about. But mateship is also about opportunity. And this is where the Asia Society plays such an important role. I would never have expected to come to Houston and see a magnificent building with so many people, so engaged in helping to influence the destiny of the fastest growing region, not only in the world, but in the history of humanity. In the history of humanity. And the reason why Asia is growing so fast is because it's embracing the very values that we fight for and 150,000 Americans buried in the sand between Australia and Japan died for in World War II. And that is freedom, and opportunity, and hope that you can give your children and the generations beyond an even better quality of life than you have. So one of the things that just fills me with glee is this massive increase in the number of Asians moving into the middle class from poverty. And it's happened at a rapid rate. In 2009, there were 525 million Asians in the middle class. Today, there is 1.4 billion Asians in the middle class. In 4 years' time, there will be 3.5 billion Asians in the middle class. 66% of the world's middle class will be in Asia in 4 years' time. And it is that middle class that has driven economic growth on a scale that was totally unexpected from the time of the Industrial Revolution. Because that's the consumption class. In the United States, 2/3 of your economic growth every year comes from household consumption. That's the middle class, the engine room of the economy. You can have big companies, but you don't have big companies unless you have big consumers. And when you have consumers with money in their pockets, it drives economic growth, especially in developed economies. So it was the European middle class that drove the prosperity of Europe up until the beginning of the First World War, particularly on the back of the Industrial Revolution. And then we saw the emergence of the American middle class, incredibly powerful, increasingly funded by some debt, but they drove through consumption the massive growth of the global economy into the second half of the 20th century. And now we are seeing the third great wave in the history of humanity, the Asian middle class, which is going to drive the world economy for the 21st century and beyond. Maybe, just maybe, it will be the African middle class with this massive demographic change that is going to completely redefine what the economy looks like at a global level in the 22nd century. But I'm pretty confident I won't be around to see it. This growth is driving commodity prices. It's driving the massive change in consumer behaviour. It's driving the demand for improvement in quality of life. I've seen it firsthand, both as Treasurer and in my role as Chair of the G20, and on the boards of the IMF and the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank and all of them. I've had that sort of role. But I am watching the transformation of a massive region in the world that really wants to embrace the values embodied by mateship. So free trade really does matter. You know why? I say it from my own experience. I grew up in a small business family, the son of a Palestinian Catholic refugee to Australia. When my dad came on 3rd of September 1948, the only thing he'd been able to do is fight for the British in World War II. So he came, he didn't know what to do, he set up a little delicatessen, a little food shop in Sydney, near Bondi Beach. And he just started, like so many other immigrants, in the shop. You know, buying food, preparing it, engaging with customers. And then he moved into real estate, eventually bought the building he was in, the building next door. The story went on. It's a great American dream, it's a great Australian dream. And he set up a real estate business in 1969. I remember it quite vividly. And as a realtor, he relied on people walking past the front of his shop, looking in and seeing the photo of a house and thinking, that's a nice house. I want to go and have a look at that. Then gradually my brothers took over the business and there were magazines published and colour ads for houses put into the newspapers, and that was, when it went colour, that was a big step forward. And then along came the internet. And when I asked my brothers to sell my apartment in Sydney, a fellow bought it sight unseen in London, off the internet. And all of a sudden, my dad, who's not around anymore, he said, you know what? You don't rely on people going past the shop anymore, do you? Because the whole world is a shop. That's the transformation. So what is important is that we share the values that underpin that. We set the rules of the game. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, which America for the moment has chosen not to join, was about setting the rules of the game for the Asia-Pacific region based on the values that have delivered us prosperity for years, such as the rule of law, protection of intellectual property, removing protectionism and tariffs, encouraging the movement of capital. America has nothing to fear. You have 40% of the world's research and development money spent here in the United States. I can name 20 large American companies operating around the world. I can name 2 Chinese companies, maybe. Can you name 20 Chinese companies that are completely reshaping the world in the way that Apple and Google and Microsoft and IBM and a range of others are doing every day? No, you can't. You can barely name 20 other companies in total. That's through your innovation. And then in capital markets, 70% of all capital transactions in the world are based in US dollars. You are the reserve currency. What do you got to fear? I'll swap. Give me a shot. So when you have free trade with your innovation, with your capital, with your protection of what you produce, you can climb great mountains. Actually, you have. America was great at the beginning of the 20th century. It still is great. And in fact, it will continue to be great because what underpins your society, what underpins your economy is a set of values. You know that you don't want the big state. And I totally agree. Taking money off you to give it to someone else should be your discretion in the first place. Of course we need our safety nets. There's no argument about that. Of course we need to protect the vulnerable. That's what a caring and compassionate society does. But at the same time, there's no greater wisdom in Washington or Canberra than there is in Houston or Sydney or in you. So we need to be advocates. The Asia Society needs to be an advocate for the freedoms that have made America successful and take them to the Asia-Pacific region. To explain to the people here, the opinion leaders, you have nothing to fear about the growth of Asia. See it as an opportunity. That's how America became rich in the first place. It seized the opportunities. It took advantage of the circumstances, and as a result, America has become the global superpower unlike any other. Every major global power in the history of humanity has relied on invading other countries to grow its influence, to grow its economic fortune. The Romans, the Egyptians, the Brits, the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the list goes on. They all had to invade and conquer other countries. America has been dragged into the world, had reluctantly dragged into World War I, reluctantly dragged into World War II. It's always been a reluctant global leader, and it says, judge us on our values. Judge us on the way we treat our people. Judge us on what we believe to be true. We don't want to occupy your country. So you see countries like Vietnam, which were napalmed by the United States military 40 years ago. They are desperate to be closer to the United States than they are to China, which helped them to defeat the US and Australia. They're desperate to be your friend. They want to sidle up. That's why they wanted TPP. They wanted an economic link to the United States. So too Malaysia, so too Indonesia, so too all the countries in the Asian region that actually want to be the controllers of their destiny. And it's a complicated area with this massive growth in the middle class, with this massive growth of China. I can tell you 100 stories about why China wants to be a part of it as well. China wants America to be active and engaged in the Asian region. Of course it does, because they have seen the prosperity associated with capitalism and enterprise and freedom. They've seen that prosperity lift their people out of poverty, and they want to maintain that prosperity. So there's nothing to fear in Asia. In fact, there's something to embrace. But it requires leadership. And the leadership of the United States in the Asia-Pacific region is going to shape the destiny of the United States in the 21st century. You can't ignore 66% of the world's middle class. You just can't. You can't ignore the person that wants to buy something from your shop. You keep doing it, sooner or later you go broke. So the world is changing. It's exciting because so much is based on shared values, and it's exciting because at the end of the day, we all benefit. Here, right across the United States, in Australia, throughout Asia, and of course around the rest of the world. Thank you very much. I think we're going to questions. Don't be shy, please. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd be interested in your
I think there's a microphone there. Yep.
Ambassador Greg Veazey from LNG Limited. I'd be interested in your thoughts on what you assume the flawed logic of the U.S. dropping out of TPP.
Well, I can understand the resentment of communities that have had to suffer enormous change. I mean, we are living through a period of enormous change. There's a terrific book written by Jane Newnham called The White Working Class. Has anyone read it? You've got to read it. It's about the American working class. It's not a long book, but it's a powerful book, The White Working Class. And she talks about when did America, and it's a really good assertion, when did America start laughing at the working class? When did the educational elites, and look, this equally applies in Australia and around the world, when did everyone start laughing at the worker? That, you know, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, held up the worker, especially in the wake of the Depression, and said, you know, we've got to stand by the worker. And, you know, it was a constant theme, and then all of a sudden the educational elite started laughing at the workers and saying, hang on, you know, there's someone to disparage. We'll do it through, you know, television. I mean, it might have been Al Bundy on Married with Children. Everyone laughed at him. Or Homer Simpson. You know, there's a guy, classic American middle class, working class, that goes to work every day and he becomes a figure of derision. And every night I see on TV here, you know, Hollywood and late night shows, New York, laughing at the community. And there's a sense of elitism. And these people don't want to be laughed at. They've lost their jobs because of change, be it environmental change or economic change. They've lost the stability associated with that work. All of a sudden, they've seen the emergence of this massive wealthy class creating technology that they don't understand. And there's an element of resentment. They've seen, you know, massive job losses in their town. They've seen their children being told that if they haven't got a degree, they're going nowhere in life. And it's the same in Australia. It's the same right around the world. And so there's this massive growth in resentment. And both the Democrats and the Republicans here, both candidates were opposed to the TPP. Let's not forget that. I mean, the only reason it was going to get through was with Republican support, even though it was the Democrat president. And I was intimately involved in that sort of negotiation. But, you know, why wouldn't you want to have Vietnam have legal protection for your pharmaceuticals? So when I sell, you know, I'm an American company, I'm selling pharmaceuticals into the fastest growing region in the world. Currently, like Vietnam, I have no protection. None. No intellectual protection. Under the TPP, Vietnam was going to sign up to 8 years to protect the intellectual property of Americans. And God, you guys have the intellectual property of pharmaceuticals in a range of different areas, technology, AI, the list goes on. Why wouldn't you want to have legal protections? That's what the TPP did. The TPP got them to reduce their tariffs so they can sell more goods into their market. That sounds like a good deal to me. And it was based on the collective best interests of our countries as opposed to some other countries that don't want to necessarily have those protections in place, that are happy to steal the intellectual property of America or Australia. And they were the ones arguing against TPP, and they won. And they happened to find 2 candidates in the last presidential election that agreed with them for different reasons. So what we've got to do collectively is explain to people why free trade works. And it comes back to more people passing in front of your shop every day. And that one person, because of the colour of their skin or because where they live, they're not being financially penalised because they're coming to buy something from your shop. So you've got to take into account the domestic pressures And the one statistic that I throw at people in Washington, you know, China lost 19 million manufacturing jobs between 1995 and 2005. China lost 19 million manufacturing jobs. Where they lose it to? Some of the other countries that could produce cheaper and technology. But that didn't resonate. Have faith, it'll come back in one form or another. Yes.
So in light of the issues that you have raised, how would you characterize the strength of Australia-U.S. relations as the administration has changed? 1 year into this new administration, how would you characterize the strength of our relationship politically today?
I think it is as strong as it has ever been, if not stronger. Despite a very interesting early phone call between the President and the Prime Minister, they actually both respect each other for the positions they hold. They have very honest discussions with each other. Our Prime Minister used to be a partner of Goldman Sachs, and spent a lot of time in New York, and is very familiar with some of the thinking, it is a very strong relationship. Deeper down, and this occupies probably half my time as ambassador, is dealing with intelligence and military relationship. Australia arguably is the closest intelligence partner in the world for the United States. We do things that other countries can't do to help the US in a region, obviously, but also more generally. And at a military level, we have military personnel in 39 US states. Say again, we have military personnel based in 39 US states. We are spending $20 million a day buying equipment here. But more significantly, Boeing's biggest factories and biggest footprint outside the United States is actually in Australia. So there is a huge amount of joint activity. And of course, again, I'm seeing Boeing today, but also NASA. The images of the first landing on the moon actually came through a dish outside of Canberra in the middle of Australia. And we were the 6th country on Earth to launch into space. We've been a bit slow maintaining that momentum, but in fact, we've been hopeless at maintaining that. But we're just about to have a very, very significant new engagement in the space area. And we're pretty deeply embedded with NASA as well. So at that level, it is always something to talk about. And of course, we are intimately involved in North Korea, in Iraq. We're, like you, 17 years in Afghanistan. And we are absolutely committed to the war against terrorism. So it's a very deep relationship. Yes, sir.
Ambassador, you have described, in my view, magnificently the changes and your view regarding free trade, TTP, etc. But what I am wondering to know, here in this reunion, we have many global companies that we are doing and dealing globally. TTP is not going forward for now. What is your view in terms of the changes that the globe and the countries are promoting going forward that will affect global companies that are trading today globally in this new geopolitical approach that the world is pushing forward today?
Look, I think, let me take a step from the American perspective to begin with. I think the tax changes were really important. I mean, for one company to repatriate $250 billion back to the United States, wow, right? I mean, that is wow. And what it does, it shows Americans the dividends of that trade. Right? If the money's sitting offshore, then it's a lost opportunity for America. The fact that it's being repatriated to America and reinvested in American enterprise and innovation and R&D sends a really strong message to the American people that actually there's a big dividend associated with global expansion, with free trade, with selling iPhones in the four corners of the earth. That's a real dividend. It's much harder to have a tangible dividend out of Microsoft, but you can see another dividend out of Facebook saying who's bidding for 50,000 jobs, right? So you can see that happening. For global companies, I think you need... Business has always been a reluctant advocate for political change. And I think companies are going to have to be more political. They're going to have to be more fearless as advocates for what is not only good for their shareholders, but importantly is good for their stakeholders, such as the communities they work in, such as the countries and the engagers that they deal with every day, and their customers. And those companies need to pay, for example, their fair share of tax where they earn the income. And that's something, as chair of the G20, I pushed very hard with the Chancellor of the Exchequer in Britain, and we got resistance. I mean, Jack Lew, the Secretary of the Treasury here, was resisting what we were doing, putting a tax on Google, putting a tax on a few others. But I said I cannot look at a bookseller in my country, walk into a bookshop and say to them, you have to pay tax, you have to pay rent, you have to employ Australians, and Amazon does it. And Amazon will sell products here and not even pay tax. Well, that just wasn't on. So companies do have a social responsibility as well, and it can either come from within the fabric of the company or it can be mandated by government. And I hope that it comes from within the fabric of the company. In terms of opportunities, you never know where the next market is. That's the beauty of freedom. You can look for it, you can find the best place, but it could be Brazil, it could be Peru, it could be Mexico, it could be any number of places. And Australia's engagement with South America was lacking, so the TPP for us was fantastic to engage with Mexico, to be able to enter that huge market, but also because the TPP, and I think the TPP is going to happen, but it's going to be TPP 11, not TPP 12, including the United States. I think it will proceed without the United States, and that will happen early this year. But it means for us, for example, we've gone around and negotiated a new free trade agreement with Peru because we want to expand our markets. And it's amazing what you can do. As Treasurer, I had to close, it is immensely painful. I had to oversee the closure of the car industry in Australia, the car manufacturing industry in Australia. And they were going to go, but we had to manage it. We had to manage it because we couldn't keep writing out a cheque for $1 billion of subsidies to Detroit and Tokyo every year. And because we said we're not going to provide subsidies to the car industry, all of a sudden Korea said, right, can we negotiate that free trade agreement? We said, absolutely. And they said, well, we couldn't do it while you were subsidising your car industry, but now you're not. Let's open up. We said, fantastic. We were getting billions of dollars in net revenue out of a new free trade agreement with Korea. And then Japan came to us and said, hang on, you've got to deal with Korea. We went, yeah, we've been negotiating with you for 10 years. And they said, we want to do a deal. You've done one with Korea. And we went, great, let's do a deal. So we signed a deal where we get our beef and various other things, much to the chagrin of your farmers, we get our beef in without tariffs or very low tariffs into Japan and a range of other initiatives. And then Japan said to us, that's great. And China said, hang on, you've done a deal with Japan. We said, yes, that's right. So you know what? China came to us and we negotiated a free trade agreement with China in 6 months. It had been in the backwater for about 12 years. And in the space of 2 years, we did those free trade agreements, Korea, Japan, China. So from this year, for example, we can export Australian wine into China tariff-free. American wine goes in with a 19% tariff. Who's going to win out of that? Well, I haven't got any wine shares. I do consume a lot though. But you know, how do you win? And you've got to break down those barriers. And China's the fastest growing wine market in the world. In fact, I don't know if it has exceeded the US yet, but it's pretty close. It's like growing immensely rapidly. So what we've got to do is break, and you know who should be banged down the doors? All the wine producers in the Napa Valley and everyone else, they should be banged down the doors in Washington, the congressmen. Farmers, I know the farmers are doing a great job banging down the doors of their congressmen, arguing, say, hang on, the Aussies are in Japan selling beef much cheaper than us, we've lost market share. Everyone's got to do that, and companies have got to be advocates.
You've seen a growing nativism in the world of populist views of America first and all. Australia seems to have been a country that has welcomed the stranger. And how are your immigration policies shaping up?
Well,
policies as well.
Yeah. Look, I mean, Australia is, you know, we came in 1788. White Australians came in 1788 to a country that was populated by a magnificent Indigenous community. And through our disease, through, you know, in one case even genocide, they were nearly wiped out, the Aboriginals. It was a terrible, terrible state in our history. But, you know, I remember, you know, and we've had a lot of people try and come on boats to Australia, claiming refugee status, which you've probably heard about. I remember sitting with an Aboriginal leader up in the Northern Territory on a rock. It was like Crocodile Dundee scene. And he said to me, Mr. Minister, he said, you've got to stop those boats. I said, the boats? He said, yeah, 200 years ago we let them in, look what happened. And look, what Australians have done is they've embraced immigration, they've embraced refugees, but provided that we control our borders. That's the fundamental principle. I mean, everyone is prepared, and I don't want this necessarily to become a debate about all these things here, but, you know, my father, as a Palestinian refugee, was most against people coming on boats to Australia. He said, I had to wait, I had to queue, I had to, you know, prove my worth to Australia before they'd let me in. And that's why when I came, I'm Australian. He never said he was Palestinian. He never said he was born in Bethlehem. He just never did it. He said, I am Australian. And it is a powerful lesson because we controlled our borders, we're surrounded by water, we're able to do that, but it's not easy sometimes. I mean, we've got billions of people on our doorstep. And we're this population of Florida, we're 24 million people, right? In an area the size of the continental United States. But we control our borders. And so because we control our borders, our immigration program is about 1% of our population every year, which is one of the highest in the world, immigration. And we are per capita, you know, for most of the time, I think Canada's just passed us the biggest acceptor of refugees in the world. And Australians will cop it for so long as they know that people are becoming Australians, that they're legitimate and they're fair income, as we call it. I don't want that to be immediately transposed here because, you know, you've got different issues. I mean, you've got different historical issues. But there is no argument against immigration. There is no good argument against lawful immigration because it enriches our society. It makes us richer as people, and most importantly, it warms our hearts. Yes, sir.
And just now you were talking about the exporting. I have a question specifically talking about the LNG. You know, the United States in the recent years has started to export LNG to Asia Pacific region.
Yeah.
So for LNG market, do you think Australia and the United States is more like collaboration or a competition?
Oh, no, it's entirely collaboration because we wouldn't have LNG without your investment. Exhibit A, ConocoPhillips. Isn't that right, Tommy? This is a make-up for me. Oh, no, it's coming. It's coming. Without the exceptional investment of ConocoPhillips and others, but it's also Chevron, ExxonMobil. I mean, and we have a big trading imbalance with the United States. You guys have a massive trading advantage, trade surplus with Australia. You really do. This is one trade agreement that won't be torn up, I'm pretty confident, right? You've got a trade surplus with us of $25 billion a year. And we say, well, we love trading with the United States and we want to grow. And you're going, how does that work at home? Because without your investment, we wouldn't be able to export to China. And we've got a big trade surplus with China. Without the investment of ConocoPhillips and Chevron and ExxonMobil, we wouldn't be, I think it is this year, correct me, we become the biggest exporter of LNG in the world. So we're the biggest exporter of LNG in the world. We're the biggest exporter of coal in the world. We have the biggest reserves of uranium. We've got multiple areas where our commodities, we're the biggest exporter of iron ore in the world. So we love infrastructure everywhere. So we, this all helps us to maintain. We haven't had a recession for 26 years. We haven't had a recession for 26, which is the longest period of continuous growth in world history. And it's not an accident. It's about getting the balance right. LNG, the demand out of Asia for energy is just phenomenal. Prime Minister Modi said to me 3 years ago, he said, we just can't get enough of your liquid gas, your coal, and I mean our coal, no matter what you think about coal, our coal is cleaner coal than most other places, including many parts of the United States, which is the biggest producer of coal in the world. But we're the biggest exporter because there's still hundreds of millions of households in the Asian region, particularly India and Indonesia, that have no electricity. And without our coal, they don't get it. So, if you care about human beings, the starting point is to get them electricity. If, you phase out coal over a long period of time, terrific. But, lifespan's certainly a lot shorter if you don't have electricity. So LNG, we are very much partners. I mean, the demand over the medium and long term is going to be so great that there's plenty of demand to address the supply. And in fact, your companies are looking at significant further expansion in Australia. Yes, ma'am. Good to see a lady ask a question. Thank you. Microphone's coming.
Hi, good morning, Ambassador Hockey. Very interesting and inspiring story this morning. Thank you very much. I'm Laura from ConocoPhillips. I have a question. From your point of view, what's the challenges for the energy sector in the next 10 years? And how can we, like enterprise, working closely with Australia, American enterprise working closely with Australia to overcome these challenges in the energy sector? Thank you.
Well, the starting point is to explain to people you need energy. You need energy. I mean, you shouldn't have to explain the obvious. But sometimes, collectively, you're negligent in doing so. Exhibit A, those people that build infrastructure in the United States. What are they? Where's the Infrastructure Council in Washington? I've never heard of it. I've heard of a representative group of every single area of human endeavour or animal endeavour. I've heard of it in Washington. There's, I've just heard, and they've got buildings everywhere, right? There are all these interest groups. No one has an infrastructure council. And now it's getting to the crisis point where the lack of infrastructure in the United States, lack of investment in infrastructure, is going to start to punish your economic growth, right? So the United States needs to spend $25 trillion by 2040 on infrastructure. Currently, it's spending 13. by 2040, and it's a long lead time on infrastructure. So that will start to detract from your economic growth. And you need to spend that 25 just to maintain your economic growth, just to maintain it. And it's in areas like water and ports, electricity. So advocating for the obvious is actually pretty important. And in relation to the energy sector more generally, you know, you can't be reluctant about embracing alternate energy, right? It all comes out in the same form. It's just at a different cost and different level of reliability. So major energy companies would do well to say, great, we can work in partnership. We'll work in partnership, we'll work in you know, we'll go into those areas of activity, renewable, some form of renewable energy. But the bottom line is we're never going to be able to produce enough renewable energy to deliver on the base loads needs of the community. So therefore, let's work together to find a way to get the balance right. Because with that increasing middle class around the world comes increasing demands for better quality healthcare, better environment, better education, better financial services, you know, all the things that we have in our lives that growing middle class wants. So you're now seeing, for example, a growing environmental activism in China that has changed China's attitude towards renewable energy. This is coming through. It all starts at the growth of this middle class. And if you start there, even in your own business, thinking about that massive growth, you can see the massive change that it's going to bring to your business over the next 10 years. Okay, last question. Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, there you go. I'm just doing what I'm told up here. Yes, sir.
Oh, hi, Ambassador. Sean Hanrahan, Platypus Brewing. We've seen recently...
it's a great beer.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
yes.
no.
I think so too.
I think I'm going there later today.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, I look forward to it. We've seen some recent policy changes here and maybe some people refer to it as tax reform. And your comments about the middle class and countries' future prosperity built on the middle class. Are there any lessons or learnings for Australia's tax structure and maybe its future direction in taxation or role of taxation as it looks to its friends in the US?
You know, it's really, when you look at the Australian taxation system, you know, the most volatile area of taxation revenue for a treasurer is company tax. It's very volatile. The beauty of income tax is that it's broad and it rises with the economy. But increasingly, you know, we have a GST, we have a VAT. I think you've got one in Texas. No, you haven't got VAT in Texas. You've got very low taxes in Texas. Go. But, well, in Washington there's VAT. And they are a pretty good tax from a structural perspective because you know consumption will grow. And having a tax on consumption means you're able to get rid of other taxes. It really depends on the mix. But the bottom line is with global trade, everything's changing. And so governments increasingly start to tax the things that can't move, like real estate. You know, you can't pick up the soil and take it somewhere. So then you start to increase your tax take on the real estate, especially given that real estate isn't as productive an asset as, say, investment in shares or investment in business, where the capital is redeployed into new equipment, in deploying people, whereas if you've got dormant real estate, I'm not talking about new construction, but if I buy a house for $1 million and sell it for $2 million and do nothing to it, I'm not creating anything, right? I'm getting rich on speculation, but I'm not actually creating anything. Whereas if I own a business that's worth $1 million and I'm employing people and making things and innovating, and the business increases in value to $2 million, I'm employing more people, I'm creating more value, I'm selling more goods. And that's the economic activity governments have got to try and stimulate. Now, the United States hasn't finished with its tax reform, and its tax reform in Australia isn't finished. I mean, it'll never finish for so long as the dynamics of an economy change. governments still need to raise money. But it is the case that the biggest challenge worldwide is governments are spending too much money. Doesn't matter where it is. Governments are spending too much money. And ultimately, every dollar that comes to the government that they spend is your money. Only around half the population pays tax in America and in Australia. Only half the population pays tax. So sooner or later, you're going to run out. And, well, so you need tax reform wherever it might be. Thanks very much.